So, Matt, starting off with this question, do you think handicapping props in baseball is easier than handicapping full games?
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things where you want to try and control the variables, and the least amount of variables that you can, have to factor into a handicap. And when you're looking at K props, you're looking at one pitcher against one lineup, no bullpens, no opposition. I don't care what happens in the other half of the inning. That's why I like in baseball to kind of narrow things down. I also like doing the 3 inning bets instead of 5 inning bets because then you're basically getting a pitcher the first time through the lineup. But yeah, K props are basically that pitcher, their history against the lineup, their current form. Nothing else. I want nothing to do with bullpens in baseball nowadays.
You mentioned that you like 3 inning bets. Are you one of those guys or not? Do you shy away from first inning bets, either no run first inning bets or a run in the first inning?
Yeah, I'm not one of those guys who does the nerfies, the yerfies, whatever. I can't. I mean, look, I want to do as little betting as possible. If I could bet on the first batter and that's it, and then just get out, that would be great. But I need at least a little bit of a sample size. That's why I kind of go to 3 as opposed to just the no runs in the first inning. Although last year at one point, I think Luis Castillo gave up runs in the first inning in like 4 or 5 straight starts. That was a fun little trend to ride, and then eventually he figured it out. But if you could find something like that, then yeah, why not? I'm just not one of those people.
Joseph's on the Roman guest line and K props. And Matt, it's a tough spot coming on the show this early in the morning because a lot of these props are not posted yet. But are there any good spots? Because you can look at the games and see where maybe there's a good situation for a K prop over or under. Do you have any games circled on the slate today?
Well, it's the White Sox and the Indians, who are two of the more under base K prop opponent teams. You look at the Indians,
Guardians.
11-2 to the
Guardians.
under. Excuse me, the Guardians. Yes, I'm so used to saying the Indians. I watched Major League last night. That's why I was talking about the Guardians. 11-2 to the under in their last 13 games. 3.95 strikeouts against right-handed starting pitching so far this season. And you look at Vince Velasquez, who knows what he's going to do? I mean, his number is going to be very interesting because we know he can strike out a ton of guys, but we also know he can walk a ton of guys and not last very long. So he's going up against an Indians team that just doesn't strike out a lot. We saw Giolito go under his number yesterday. And then you look at the White Sox, 8-1 to the under in their last 9 line games. Now, the reason why I say it like that is because there were several games where there were no K props, whether they faced an opener or a pitcher that the books had no idea about. They're averaging just 3.55 strikeouts against starting pitchers overall, 3.52 against righties and 3.66 against lefties. Aaron Savali, not a guy who strikes out a ton of people. I'm expecting like a 3.5 or a 4.5. I'll probably look at the under there on Savali because the White Sox just don't strike out a ton.
Matt, I'm curious about your process, particularly as someone who, when it comes to looking at K props or betting on baseball, I would consider myself definitely a novice compared to you or to Chelsea. So just to break it down for me, what do you do or what are some of the things you look at when you're saying, okay, this is how I'm going to play this?
Well, so this year I actually started making a database, and what I've done is I've gone and put down a giant Excel spreadsheet, wrote down all that, well, not wrote down, but typed up all the K-prop numbers as close to what they are at first pitch as possible, write down the unders, whether they're righties, they're lefties, and then, kind of fire in some formulas and things like that. So it's been able to figure out the situations like the Marlins against left-handers this year. The Marlins are striking out 6.37 times against left-handed starting pitchers. So when I see a guy like Bumgarner last night and he actually isn't going to get ejected in the first inning, he's going to be a guy I want to target on the over. And especially last night when I got it was plus 120 to over 4.5. So anytime you can get a plus on a pitcher and a situation that you can absolutely love, you certainly do so. I used to look at the umpires. I think it's a little early to be looking at the umpires for that sort of thing. And the one thing you do want to look at with regards to bullpens is, does somebody have a full array of arms? Or do they have, are they coming off a doubleheader and they need this starting pitcher to go deeper? Do you get more opportunities to get out? So, it's certainly situational type of things. Are there certain pitchers who struggle against certain teams? Pete Alonso and J.D. Davis had great numbers against Patrick Corbin in their career, but the Mets have been terrible against left-handed pitchers. So those are some factors you kind of consider when looking at these K-props.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but there is a game that looks like it's going to be shaping up to be a pitcher's duel. It is the Rays and the Angels. Shane McClanahan, the lefty for the Rays, going against Ohtani, who we all know can strike out a ton of batters. So what are you looking at in that game? Are there any strikeout props that maybe worth a play there.
So here's the thing about Ohtani. His market is, and then we just talked about this during the break, his market is equivalent to the superstars in the NBA. The bookmakers know they could set a high number and people will be like, oh, I'll just take the over. Giannis never misses. He'll go over whatever points prop we put out there. And that's the same for Ohtani. People will be like, well, wait a second. Ohtani strikes out double figures every time, it feels like. So of course he's going to go over. So it's a market I don't necessarily love. But McClanahan, you look at him against the Angels struck out 6 times against Rich Hill. Like, that's the equivalent of 3 or 4 starts for Rich Hill. If you look at so far this season, the Angels have averaged 5.22 strikeouts against left-handed starting pitching. Luzardo, who went last night, had 12 strikeouts against the Angels. So to me, if I'm going to look at somebody in this game, it's potentially the over for McClanahan. He's a guy who strikes out everybody, it feels like. So he would be the guy that I would lean to with the over in this matchup.
We're talking with Matt Josephs, known as Mid-Major Matt. He's a handicapper for Sports Memo. Matt, when you're fading pitchers, do you look at things differently than if you're maybe on an over K prop? Or how do you, I guess, quantify looking at bad pitchers versus ones that are effective? Is there a difference?
Well, it's funny because the bad pitchers, you're going to get really low K props. You know, it's funny for people who are not familiar with this market, they see 2.5s out there and they're like, wait, that can't be right. And it happens more often than people think. I'm guessing Spencer Watkins is going to get a 2.5 today against the Cardinals. It's very difficult to take some unders. Zach Greinke is a guy who is an under guy. He is somebody, but his numbers are going to be very low. You're going to get 2.5s, 3.5s, and you're going to be sweating the whole time when he gets a K in the first inning, even though you know he just doesn't strike out a ton of guys. So, yeah, the bad pitchers, you're going to get lower numbers. And sometimes you feel comfortable taking those unders because you know they're just not going to get to the over. But a lot of times the books won't put numbers out for some of these people. There's some rookies going today. The books are so scared about putting out bad numbers that they'll just be like, I don't really want to do it. So they won't put them out anyway.
Right. And something I feel like people don't always consider when it comes to K props is these pitchers aren't really gunning for strikeouts sometimes. They want to get out of innings without getting runs. So sometimes they can have a great outing without hitting their K prop. You mentioned something earlier in the show, how if a team really needs length from their starter, maybe the leash will be a little bit longer. So I'm looking at this Red Sox game today. And again, putting you on the spot here, but it seems like you know your stuff. Nathan Eovaldi, I think a start coming after Garrett Whitlock only went 3 innings for a Red Sox bullpen. That's pretty bad. What do you think the number will be for Eovaldi? Do you think that's a good spot for him going against, God, I just forgot who they were playing. Man, I'm drawing a blank. But bottom line, Garrett Whitlock. Yeah, the Braves. Whitlock struck out, 4, 5 in 3 innings of work. So I think Eovaldi might be in a good spot here.
7 straight right-handed pitchers have had 5 strikeouts or more, which means the books are probably going to set it at 5.5 and make you decide here. I mean, the Braves lineup, they're averaging 5.1 strikeouts against right-handed starting pitchers so far this season. So it is one of those things where you're right. The length is going to be a factor here against a more free swinging offense. The problem is, I think the books know that they're going to. The other problem with the K-prop market here is they can give you a great number, but the juice is so ridiculous that you can't bet it. And I feel like that's an issue. So I have a juice tolerance. Usually it's around like minus 150 or so. Anything above that, I have to really love it because it's, minus 160, minus 170. Then you got to start throwing a little bit more money to make the bet actually worth it. And then if it loses, you lose more money than you want to. So it really depends on what the number is. 5.5 is something I might be interested in. But then again, if the juice is like minus 160, minus 170, forget about it.
Right. Lots of great insight from Matt Josephs. Find him on Twitter at Mid-Major Matt. He tweets out all kinds of good stuff when it comes to K-props. Matt, thanks for waking up with us this morning.
Thanks so much for having me.